What's up, everybody? So, I've kind of been looking into this Atlantis idea and the Irish Egyptian connection for a couple weeks now. And I can't believe none of these guys have wrote about this or I've heard anybody say anything. But do you see anything that might have an Egyptian connection here? Like the Faroe Islands? Pharaoh? It's literally the exact same word. So I got a couple of chapters into that Commons Beaumont book, and he started dropping some pretty hard geography and landmarks that are still there. Some of you guys from over there can probably verify this. But before we went further into that, I wanted to cover this. So, just like in Britain, where they have a local legend saying that the whole name of Britain came from Brutus, who settled there after the Battle of Troy, and academia says, no, you guys are crazy. The same thing's going on in Scotland, where they say that the Scoti are named after Scota. Sometimes it's spelled Scotia or like Scotia, who was the daughter of a pharaoh. But again, they say that's just a legend, never happened. So around 1440, Walter Bauer made his Compendium of Scottish History, the Scotichronicon. That's a good band name. Scotichronicon. Anyway, he said the Scottish people were actually descendants of the ancient Egyptians and could trace their ancestry to the daughter of an Egyptian pharaoh, Scota. The story of Scota begins with a Greek king by the name of Gatheos. In one version of the story, which involves Ireland, Gatheos is known as Gaeotoglas, or the word Gael is said to be derived from his name, and was originally from the region of Scythia. It is also said that Gaeotoglas lived during the time of Moses, and the latter is said to have cured the former when he was bitten by a serpent. Gaeotoglas was also promised by Moses that no serpent or other poisonous creature will inhabit the western island that his posterity would inhabit one day. One of the Gaeotoglas's grandsons, Neul, was invited into Egypt as an instructor by a pharaoh and eventually married one of his daughters, Scota. Both Scotland and the Roman name for Ireland, Scotia, are said to be derived from her name. Neul and Scota's people were later driven from Egypt by a later pharaoh and wandered around the Mediterranean until they reached Spain. During the rule of Meled Melesius, whose wife was incidentally also a pharaoh's daughter by the name of Scota, these people heard about Ireland and believed it to be the island foresaw by Moses. Although Meled died in Spain, his wife and children eventually reached and settled in Ireland. And you got to check out this Meled dude. He's got the long flowing robes going on. He's kind of throwing some goat horns there with his hands. And he's got the Alice Cooper meets Genghis Khan look going with the little mustache there. I think those are two separate mustaches. This dude is super serious. And there's Scota in the background. It's just, dude, bro, come on. You've been looking at yourself in the mirror for 3 hours. Let's go. Sorry. This legendary origin of the Irish people is also shared by the Scots. For the Scots, however, the story did not end in Ireland. From Ireland, the descendants of Neul and Scota traveled to the west coast of Scotland, battled and defeated the Picts, and became the Scottish people. This version of Scottish lineage can also be found in the Declaration of Arbroath, an important document written in 1320 by the barons and noblemen of Scotland, requesting the intervention of the Pope on their behalf during the Wars of Independence. In the second paragraph of the document, it is written, "Most Holy Father, we know, and from the chronicles and books of the ancients, we find that among other famous nations, our own, the Scots, has been graced with widespread renown. It journeyed from Greater Scythia by way of the Tyrrhenian Sea and the Pillars of Hercules, and dwelt for a long course of time in Spain among the most savage peoples. But nowhere could it be subdued by any people, however barbarous. Thence it came 1,200 years after the people of Israel crossed the Red Sea to its home in the West where it still lives today. So I gotta say, here's where I'm at with the overall big picture of things. Is anymore when I hear someone trying to link their ancestry back to the 12 tribes, it makes me think that that got added by the Church of Rome. You know, the Jesuits that have taken over education systems in almost every country. It was punishable by hanging at one time for them to teach in England. Yeah, those guys. And to me, it just looks like, what better way to undermine someone's origin story than to insert yourself into it? And, well, now that I've brought that up, I feel that deserves a full explanation. It's something I've been thinking for a while. And it kind of made me stop recording yesterday once I brought it up, and been pondering this all night now. Happy Memorial Day, everybody. So I'm sure just about everybody's heard me talk about the Old Testament and how after years of pondering the subject, I finally had to come to the conclusion that Moses and Yahweh in the book of Exodus is not the true God of the universe, not the Father that Jesus was speaking about. In the big picture of things, I think Jesus came and paid a ransom to save those people because they had made a deal with the devil, basically. I'm not saying that Yahweh is Satan himself. Most Christians view everything as either there's God or the devil and nothing in between. But if you just look at the Canaanite pantheon, there was El the father, and Yahweh was one of many sons. It looks like Baal was the eldest. And that's probably why Yahweh liked taking what was rightfully the eldest son's titles and inheritance and giving it to someone else, like Jacob and Esau. Esau was the eldest and entitled to his father's inheritance. And Yahweh said, no, I'm going to take what's rightfully yours and give it to your lying, thieving little brother. But according to the ancients, there were all kinds of gods. There's all kinds of demons. So I no longer think in the terms that I was taught growing up Christian as of just God and Satan. And by the way, I got a whole playlist, 25 videos showing how Yahweh was a petty tyrant and is not the true God of the universe. I know some of you agree, some of you don't agree, that's fine. But if you agree that he wasn't the true God and that the Church of Rome slapped that story right on the front of the New Testament, then you got to kind of rethink everything along those lines. So like in this case, it is said that Gatheos glass lived during the time of Moses, and Moses is said to have cured him after he was bitten by a serpent, which harkens back to the passage where they were wandering around the desert with no food and they were getting angry about it. And Yahweh said, how dare you want food? I'm going to send poisonous snakes to bite you. Then after Moses pleads with him, he says, okay, we'll make a bronze serpent and put it on a pole. And when people are bit, then look at that. So this sounds a lot like that, huh? Well, then now I got to ask, was that part of the original legend of Gatheos glass, or did that get added on by the Church of Rome? And then there's this quote saying they made it up to the Isles 1,200 years after the people of Israel crossed the Red Sea. Okay, who are we quoting here, though? Well, this version of Scottish lineage can be found in the Declaration of Arbroath, an important document written in 1320 by the barons and noblemen of Scotland requesting the intervention of the Pope on their behalf. Well, I was watching Thomas Sowell's video on the history of the Scots just the other day, and he specifically said that in the 14th century, there wasn't a single Scottish baron that could even sign his name. Amazingly enough, though, by the 16th and 17th century, the Scots were among the preeminent intellectuals of the world. People would travel from all around the world to go to their school of medicine. But in a time that nobody could read or write there, we had the Declaration of Arbroath explaining how the Scots were descendants of the tribes of Yeezy. So when only your future generations are going to be able to read this document, then it's pretty easy to change a couple lines in there and put the church right at the heart of their mythology. And just so you know, the Scotty who eventually went to Scotland went to Ireland first. And I'm sure everybody's heard one version or another of why there are no serpents in Ireland. But here they're saying it's because Moses promised them that there would never be any serpents there. Okay, but was that really how their original mythology went? Did they literally hand this down by word of mouth for generations saying, well, yeah, Moses told us this? Probably not. It was probably saying something like a holy man of God promised there would be no serpents there. And then when the Church of Rome came along, they said, oh, well, that holy man of God is Moses, of course. And I think they've pretty well done this with mythology around the world. So look, Moses was allegedly around 1300 BC, and I'm really not sure whether he actually existed or not. That's a big, long category right there, but let's say he did. Well, around that time, over here, you had the Babylonian, then Assyrian Empire, and then down here, you had the Egyptian Empire. These are both the superpowers of their days. And then here in the middle, basically where those two would meet up and fight every once in a while, you have the 12 tribes. And somehow the whole world is tracing their lineage back to these 12 tribes in this little bitty area. So what, was the whole world empty in 1300 BC to where everybody is descendant from the 12 tribes? That's ridiculous. Do you think the Greeks and the Romans were trying to trace their lineage back to the 12 tribes? No, they left graffiti behind, making fun of the Greys for worshiping a donkey-headed god. And since they had heard that Jesus was supposed to be the king of the Greys, then they associated him with that donkey-headed god. Another example is the Tuatha De Danann. How many times have you heard that that's because they were descendants of the tribe of Dan? Well, I recently watched a video how they were showing that the Danann part at the end was a recent addition to the name. It was just the Tuatha De. And according to them, that's a reference to Thoth. And if you think about it, if your language doesn't have the sound th in there, then you're going to pronounce it tuha, tuhatha. So I haven't been able to verify that anywhere else, but it does make a little bit of sense. And it's yet another Irish-Egyptian connection. According to some of these authors we've been reading from, like Commons Beaumont and Connor McDarry, they're saying that the Egyptians themselves originated from the British Isles and Ireland, which was formerly Atlantis. And according to them, that's why Egyptian culture sprang to life fully formed. They didn't progress up to these magnificent temples. That was the first thing they did. And then later generations tried to emulate that, and their building technologies regressed instead of progressed. So anyway, that was kind of a whole video sidetrack there, but that's kind of where I'm at with things. I think the Church of Rome has inserted themselves into a lot of people's ancient mythology. So I just wanted to show how there are quite a few connections between the Irish, Scots, and Egypt, and some of the oldest mummies in Egypt had red hair. They even refer to these as pre-dynastic mummies. I'm still not 100% sold on what McDarry and Beaumont are selling, but I gotta admit that there's some connections there, and it's got my interest, so I'm not gonna throw it out just yet. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll catch you on the next one. Static out.